The temperature. Chapter then. The temperature drops sharply on the way to the second encampment. Even when I sleep in the tents, I'm freezing. When it's my turn to sleep outside, I often wake up with shards of ice webbed in my hair. Sarah is stoic, silent, and pale-faced. Blue gets sick. The first day she wakes up sluggish. She has trouble keeping up, and at the end of our day of hiking, she falls asleep even before the fire is built, curling up on the ground like a small animal. Raven moves her into her tent. That night I wake to a muffled shouting. I sit up, startled. The night sky is clear, the stars razor-sharp and glittering. The air smells like snow. There is rustling from Raven's tent, some whimpering, the sound of whispered reassurances. Blue is having bad dreams. The next morning, Blue comes down with a fever. There is no choice, she must walk anyway. The snow is coming, and we are still 30 miles from the second camp, and many more miles than that from the winter homestead. She cries as she walks, stumbling more and more. We take turns carrying her. Me, Raven, Hunter, Lu, and Grandpa. She is burning. Her arms around my neck are electric wires, pulsing with heat. The next day, we reach the second encampment, an area of loose shale set underneath an old, half-tumbled-down brick wall, which forms a kind of barrier and shields us somewhat from the wind. We set to work digging up the food, pitching traps, and scavenging the area, which once must have been a decent-sized town, for canned goods and useful supplies. We'll stay here for 2 days, possibly 3, depending on how much we can find. Beyond the hooting of the owls and the rustling of nighttime creatures, we hear the distant sounds of rumbling trucks. We are less than 10 miles from one of the intercity highways. It's strange to think how close we have been to the valid places, established cities filled with food, clothing, medical supplies, and yet we may as well be in a different universe. The world is bifurcated now, folded cleanly in half like the pitched steep sides of a tent. The valids and the invalids live on different planes, in different dimensions. Blue's nighttime terrors get worse. Her cries are piercing, she babbles nonsense, a language of gibberish and dream words. When it is time to start toward the third encampment, the clouds have moved in, heavy knitted through the sky, and the light is the dull, dark gray of an imminent storm. She is almost unresponsive. Raven carries her that day. She won't let anyone help, even though she, too, is weak, and often falls behind. We walk in silence. We are weighed down by fear, it blankets us thickly, making it feel as though we are already walking through snow, because all of us know that Blue is going to die. Raven knows it too. She must. That night Raven builds a fire and places Blue next to it. Even though Blue's skin is burning, she shivers so hard that her teeth knock together. The rest of us move around the fire as quietly as possible, we are shadows in the smoke. I fall asleep outside, next to Raven, who stays awake to rake the fire and make sure Blue stays warm. In the middle of the night, I wake up to the muffled sounds of crying. Raven is kneeling over Blue. My stomach caves, and I am filled with terror. I have never seen Raven cry before. I'm afraid to speak, to breathe, to move. I know that she must think everyone is asleep. She would never allow herself to cry otherwise. But I can't stay silent, either. I rustle loudly in my sleeping bag, and just like that the crying stops. I sit up. Is she? I whisper. I can't say the last word. Dead. Raven shakes her head. She's not breathing very well. At least she's breathing, I say. A long silence stretches between us. I'm desperate to fix this. I know, somehow, that if we lose Blue we lose a piece of Raven, too. And we need Raven, especially now that Tak is gone. She'll get better, I say, to comfort her. I'm sure she'll be okay. Raven turns to me. The fire catches her eyes, makes them glow like an animal's. No, she says simply. No, she won't. Her voice is so full of certainty, I can't contradict her. For a moment, Raven doesn't say anything else. Then she says, "Do you know why I named her Blue?" The question surprises me. I thought you named her for her eyes. Raven turns back toward the fire, hugging her knees. I lived in Yarmouth, close to a border fence. A poor area. Nobody else wanted to live so close to the wilds. Bad luck, you know. A shiver snakes through me, and I suddenly feel very alert. Raven has never spoken of her life before the wilds. She has always repeated that there is no such thing. No before. I was like everybody else, really. Just accepted what people told me and didn't think too much about it. Only cureds go to heaven. Patrols are for my own protection. The uncured are dirty, they turn into animals. The disease rots you from inside. Stability is godliness and happiness. She shrugs, as though shaking off the memory of who she was. Except that I wasn't happy. I didn't understand why. I didn't understand why I couldn't be like everybody else. I think of Hannah, spinning around once in her room, arms wide, saying, "You think this is it? This is all there is?" The summer I turned 14, they started new construction by the fence. They were projects, really, for the poorest families in Yarmouth, the badly matched ones, or families whose reputations had been ruined because of dissent, or even rumors of it. You know what it's like. During the day, I used to play around the construction site. A bunch of us did. Of course, we had to be careful to stay separate, the boys and the girls. There was a line that divided us. Everything east of the waterline was ours, everything west of it was theirs. She laughs softly. It seems like a dream now. But at the time it seemed like the most normal thing in the world. There was nothing to compare it to, I say, and Raven shoots me a quick glance, nodding sharply. Then there was a week of rain. Construction came to a standstill, and nobody wanted to explore the site. I didn't mind the rain. I didn't like to be at home very much. My dad was. There's a hitch in her voice, and she breaks off. He wasn't totally right after the procedure. It didn't work correctly. There was disruption of the mood-regulating temporal lobes. That's what they called it. He was mostly okay, like everybody else. But every so often he flew into rages. For a while she stares at the fire, silent. My mom helped us cover the bruises, put on makeup and stuff. We couldn't tell anyone. We didn't want too many people knowing that my dad's cure hadn't worked properly. People get hysterical, he could have been fired. My mom said people would make things difficult. So instead we hid it. Long sleeves in summertime. Lots of sick days. Lots of lies, too, falling down, bumping my head, hitting the door frame. I have never imagined Raven as any younger than she is now. But I can see the wiry girl with the same fierce mouth, rubbing concealer over the bruises on her arms, shoulders, and face. I'm sorry, I say. The words seem flimsy, ridiculous. Raven clears her throat and squares her shoulders. It doesn't matter, she says quickly. She breaks a long, skinny twig into quarters and feeds it, one piece at a time, into the fire. I wonder whether she has forgotten about the original course of conversation about Blue's name, but then she starts speaking again. That week, the week of the rain, was one of my dad's bad times. So I went out to the site a lot. One day, I was just picking around one of the foundations. It was all cinder block and pits, hardly any of the building had actually gotten done. And then I saw this little box. A shoe box. She sucks in a breath, and even in the dark I see her tense. The rest of her story comes out in a rush. Someone must have left it there, wedged in the space underneath a part of the foundation. Except the rain was so bad it had caused a miniature mudslide. The box had rolled out into the open. I don't know why I decided to look inside. It was filthy. I thought I might find a pair of shoes, maybe some jewelry. I know, now, where the story is going. I am walking toward the muddy box alongside her. I am lifting the water-warped cover. The horror and disgust is a mud too. It is rising, black and choking, inside of me. Raven's voice drops to a whisper. She was wrapped in a blanket. A blue blanket with yellow lambs on it. She wasn't breathing. I thought she was dead. She was blue. Her skin, her nails, her lips, her fingers. Her fingers were so small. The mud is in my throat. I can't breathe. I don't know what made me try to revive her. I think I must have gone a little crazy. I was working as a junior lifeguard that summer, so I'd been certified in CPR. I'd never had to do it, though. And she was so tiny, probably a week, maybe 2 weeks old. But it worked. I'll never forget how I felt when she took a breath, and all that color came rushing into her skin. It was like the whole world had split open. And everything I'd felt was missing, all that feeling and color, all of it came to me with her first breath. I called her Blue so I would always remember that moment, and so I would never regret. Abruptly, Raven stops speaking. She reaches down and readjusts Blue's sleeping bag. The light from the fire is a low, red glow, and I can see that Blue is pale. Her forehead is beaded with sweat, and her breath comes slowly, raspingly. I am filled with a blind fury, undirected and overwhelming. Raven isn't finished with her story. I didn't even go home. I just took her and ran. I knew I couldn't keep her in Yarmouth. You can't keep secrets like that for long. It was hard enough to cover up the bruises. And I knew she must be illegal, some unmatched girl, some unmatched guy. A Deliria baby. You know what they say. Deliria babies are contaminated. They grow up twisted, crippled, crazy. She would probably be taken and killed. She wouldn't even be buried. They'd be worried about the spread of disease. She'd be burned, and packed up with the waste. Raven takes another twig and throws it in the fire. It flares momentarily, a hot white tongue of flame. I'd heard rumors about a portion in the fence that was unfortified. We used to tell stories about the invalids coming in and out, feasting on people's brains. Just the kind of shit you talk as a kid. I'm not sure whether I still believed it or not. But I took my chance on the fence. It took me forever to figure out a way over with Blue. In the end I had to use the blanket as a sling. And the rain was a good thing. The guards and the regulators were staying inside. I made it over without any trouble. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do once I crossed. I didn't say goodbye to either of my parents. I didn't do anything but run. She looks at me sideways. But I guess that was enough. And I guess you know about that too. Yeah, I croak out. There's a shredding pain in my throat. I could cry at any second. Instead, I dig my nails, as hard as I can, into my thighs, trying to break the skin beneath the fabric of my jeans. Blue murmurs something indecipherable and tosses in her sleep. The rasping in her throat has gotten worse. Every breath brings a horrible grating noise, and the watery echoes of fluid. Raven bends forward and brushes the sweat-damp strands of hair from Blue's forehead. She's burning up, Raven says. I'll get some water. I'm desperate to do something, anything, to help. It won't make any difference, Raven says quietly. But I need to move, so I go anyway. I pick my way through the frosty dark. Toward the stream, which is covered with a layer of thin ice, all webbed with fissures and cracks. The moon is high and full and reflects the silver surface and the dark flowing water underneath. I break through the ice with the bottom of a tin pail, gasping when the water flows over my fingers and into the bucket. Raven and I don't sleep that night. We take turns with a towel, icing Blue's forehead, until her breathing slows and the rasping eases. Eventually she stops fidgeting and lies quiet and docile under our hands. We take turns with the towel until dawn breaks in the sky, a blush rose, liquid and pale, even though by that time, Blue has not taken a breath for hours. Chapter now. Julian and I move through stifling darkness. We go slowly, painstakingly, even though both of us are desperate to run. But we can't risk the noise or a flashlight. Even though we're moving through what must be a vast network of tunnels, I feel just like a rat in a box. I'm not very steady on my feet. The darkness is full of whirling, swirling shapes, and I have to keep my left hand on the slick tunnel wall, which is coated with moisture and skittering insects. And rats. Rats chittering from corners, rats scampering across the tracks, nails going tick, tick, tick against the stone. I don't know how long we walk, impossible to tell, with no change in sound or texture, no way of knowing whether we are moving east or west or going around endlessly in circles. Sometimes we move alongside old railway tracks. These must have been the tunnels for the underground trains. Despite my exhaustion and nerves, I can't help but feel amazed at the idea of all these twisting, labyrinthine spaces filled with barreling machines, and people thundering along freely in the dark. Other times the tunnels are flowing with water, sometimes a bare trickle, sometimes a few feet of foul-smelling, litter-cluttered liquid, probably backed up from one of the sewer systems. That means we can't be too far from a city. I'm stumbling more and more. It has been days since I've eaten anything substantial, and my neck throbs painfully, where the scavenger broke the skin with his knife. Increasingly, Julian has to reach out and steady me. Finally he keeps a hand on my back, piloting me forward. I'm grateful for the contact. It makes the agony of walking, and silence, and straining for the sound of scavengers through the echoes and the drips, more bearable. We go for hours without stopping. Eventually the darkness turns milky. Then I see a bit of light, a long silver stream filtering down from above. There are grates in the ceiling, 5 of them. Above us, for the first time in days, I see sky, a patchy nighttime sky of clouds and stars. Unconsciously, I cry out. It is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The grates, I say. Can we? Julian moves ahead of me, and at last we risk the flashlight. He angles the beam upward, then shakes his head. Bolted tight from outside, he says. He strains onto his tiptoes and gives a little push. No way to budge them. Disappointment burns in the back of my throat. We're so close to freedom. I can smell it, wind and space, and something else, too. Rain. It must have rained recently. The smell brings tears to my eyes. We've ended up on a raised platform. Below us, the tracks are pooled with water and a covering of leaves driven down from above. On our left is an alcove, half excavated and filled with wooden crates. A flyer, remarkably well preserved, is posted on the wall. Caution, it reads. Construction zone. Hard hat area. I can't stand up anymore. I break from Julian's grasp, thudding heavily to my knees. Hey! He kneels next to me. Are you okay? Tired, I gasp out. I curl up on the ground, resting my head on my arm. It's getting harder to keep my eyes open. When I do, I see the stars above me blur into a single enormous point of light, and then fracture again. Go to sleep, Julian says. He sets my backpack down and sits next to me. What if the scavengers come? I say. I'll stay awake, Julian says. I'll listen for them. After a minute, he lies down on his back. There's a wind sweeping down from the grates, and I shiver involuntarily. Are you cold? Julian asks. A little, I say. I can barely get the words out. My throat, too, is frozen. There's a pause. Then Julian rolls over onto his side and loops his arm around me, scooting forward so our bodies are pressed together, and I am cupped in the space around him. His heart beats through my back a strange, stuttering rhythm. Aren't you worried about the deliria? I ask him. Yes, he says shortly. But I'm cold, too. After a while his heartbeat becomes more regular, and mine slows to match his. The coldness melts out of me. Lena. Julian whispers. I've had my eyes closed. The moon is now directly above us, a high white beam. Yet, I can feel Julian's heart speed up again. Do you want to know how my brother died? Okay, I say, even though something in his tone of voice makes me afraid. My brother and my dad never really got along, Julian says. My brother was stubborn. Headstrong. He had a bad temper, too. Everyone said he would be okay once he was cured. Julian pauses. It just got worse and worse as he got older, though. My parents were talking about having his cure moved up. It looked bad, you know, for the DFA and all. He was wild, and he didn't listen to my father, and I'm not even sure he believed in the cure. He was 6 years older than me. I was scared for him. Do you know what I mean? I can't bring myself to speak, so I just nod. Memories are crowding me, surging from the dark places where I have walled them up, the constant, buzzing anxiety I felt as a child, watching my mom laughing, dancing, singing along to strange music that piped from our speakers, a joy threaded through with terror, fear for Hannah, fear for Alex, fear for all of us. 7 years ago, we had another big rally in New York. That's when the DFA was going national. It was the first rally I attended. I was 11 years old. My brother begged off. I don't remember what excuse he gave. Julian shifts. For a second his arms tighten around me, an involuntary gripping, then he relaxes again. Somehow I know he has never told this story before. It was a disaster. Halfway through the rally, protesters stormed City Hall. That's where we were, half of them masked. The fight turned violent, and the police came to break it up, and suddenly it was just a brawl. I hid behind the podium, like a little kid. Afterward, I was so ashamed. One of the protesters got too close to the stage, too close to my dad. He was screaming something I couldn't hear what. It was loud, and he was wearing a ski mask. The guard brought him down with a nightstick. Weirdly, I remember I could hear that, the crack of the wood against his knee, the thud as he collapsed. That's when my dad saw it, must have seen it, the birthmark on the back of his left hand, shaped like a big half moon. My brother's birthmark. He jumped off the stage into the audience, tore off the mask, and it was him. My brother was lying there, in agony, his knees shattered in 1,000 places. But I'll never forget the look he gave my father. Totally calm, and resigned, too, like he knew what was going to happen. We finally made it out, had a police escort all the way home. My brother was stretched out in the back of the van, moaning. I wanted to ask him whether he was okay, but I knew my dad would kill me. He drove the whole way home without saying a word, without taking his eyes off the road. I don't know what my mom was feeling. Maybe not much. But I think she was worried. The book of SHHH says that our obligations to our children are sacred, right? And the good mother will finish discharging her duties in heaven, Julian quotes softly. She wanted him to see a doctor, but my dad wouldn't hear of it. My brother's knee looked bad, swollen to the size of a basketball, practically. He was sweating like crazy, in so much pain. I wanted to help. I wanted to. A tremor passes through Julian's body. When we got home, my dad threw my brother into the basement and locked it. He was going to leave him there for a day, in the dark. So my brother would learn his lesson. I picture Thomas Feynman, the clean-pressed clothing and gold cufflinks, which must give him such satisfaction, the polished watch and the neatly trimmed hair. Pure, clean, spotless, like a man who can always count on a good night's sleep. I hate you, I think, for Julian's sake. Julian has never gotten to know those words, to feel the relief in them. We could hear my brother crying through the door. We could hear him from the dining room when we ate dinner. My dad made us sit through a whole meal. I'll never forgive him for that. The last part is spoken in a whisper. I find his hand and lace my fingers in his and squeeze. He gives me a small pulse back. For a while we lie there in silence. Then, from above, there's a soft rushing sound, then the sound separates, becomes thousands of raindrops hitting the pavement. Water drums down through the grates, pinging off the metal rails of the old tracks. And then the crying stopped, Julian says simply, and I think of that day in the wilds with Raven, taking turns mopping Blue's head while the sun broke in a wave over the trees, long after we had felt her grow cold under our hands. Julian clears his throat. They said afterward it was a freak accident, a blood clot from his injury that migrated into his brain. 1 in a million chance. My dad couldn't have known. But still, he breaks off. After that, you. No, I was always so careful. I would do everything right. I would be the perfect son, a model for the DFA. Even once I found out the cure would probably kill me. It was more than fear, Julian says, a sudden rush of words. I thought if I followed the rules, things would turn out all right. That's the thing about the cure, isn't it? It isn't just about deliria at all. It's about order. A path for everyone. You just have to follow it and everything will be okay. That's what the DFA is about. That's what I believed in, what I've had to believe in. Because otherwise, it's just chaos. Do you miss him? I ask. Julian doesn't answer right away, and I know, somehow, that nobody has ever asked him this before. I think so, he says finally, in a low voice. I did for a long time. My mom told me it wouldn't be so bad after the cure. I wouldn't think about him that way anymore, she said. That's even worse, I say quietly. That's when they're really gone. I count 3 long seconds of silence, and in each one of them, Julian's heart drums against my back. I'm not cold anymore. If anything, I'm too hot. Our bodies are so close, skin sticking to skin, fingers entangled. His breath is on my neck. I don't know what's going on anymore, Julian whispers. I don't understand anything. I don't know what's supposed to happen next. You're not supposed to know, I say, and it's true, the tunnels may be long, and twisted, and dark, but you are supposed to go through them. More silence. Finally Julian says, I'm scared. He barely whispers it, but I can feel his lips moving against my neck, as though the words are being spelled there. I know, I say. Me too. I can't stay awake any longer. I'm carried back and forth through time and memory, between this rain and rains before it, as though climbing up and down a spiral staircase. Julian has his arm around me, and then Alex does, then Raven is holding my head in her lap, and then my mother is singing to me. I'm less scared with you, Julian says. Or maybe it is Alex who speaks, or maybe I've only dreamed the words. I open my mouth to respond but find I can't speak. I'm drinking water, and then I'm floating, and then there is nothing but sleep, liquid and deep. Chapter Then. We bury Blue by the river. It takes us hours to break through the frozen ground and make a hole big enough to accommodate her. We have to remove her jacket before we bury her. We can't afford to lose it. She feels so light as we lower her into the ground, just like a baby bird, hollow-boned and fragile. At the last second, as we're about to cover her with dirt, Raven pushes forward, suddenly hysterical. She'll be cold, she says. She'll freeze like that. Nobody wants to stop her. She strips off her sweater and slides into the makeshift grave, taking Blue in her arms and wrapping her in it. She's crying. Most of us turn away, embarrassed. Only Lu steps forward. Blue will be okay, Raven, she says softly. The snow will keep her warm. Raven looks up, her face wild, tear-streaked. She scans our faces. Once as though struggling to remember who we are. Then she jerks, suddenly, to her feet, and climbs up out of the lip of the grave. Bram steps forward and starts to shovel the dirt over Blue's body again, but Raven stops him. Leave her, Raven says. Her voice is loud and unnaturally high-pitched. Blue's right. It's going to snow any minute. It does start to snow as we're packing up camp. It continues to snow all day, as we make our way silently through the woods in a long, ragged line. The cold is a constant pain now, a fierce ache in my chest and fingers and toes, and the snow is mostly driving ice, and burns like hot ash. But I imagine that for Blue it falls more gently, and covers her like a blanket, where it will keep her safely until spring. Chapter Now. It's still raining in the morning. I sit up slowly. I have a wicked headache, and I'm dizzy. Julian is no longer next to me. The rain is pouring through the grates, long, twisting grey ribbons of it, and he is standing underneath them. His back is turned to me, and he has stripped down to a pair of faded cotton shorts he must have found when we scavenged for clothing and supplies. My breath catches in my throat. I know I should look away, but I can't. I'm transfixed by the sight of the rain coursing over his back, broad and muscled and strong, just like Alex's was the rolling landscapes of his arms and shoulders, his hair, now dark with water, the way he tips his head back and lets the rain run into his open mouth. In the wilds, I finally got used to seeing men naked or half naked. I got used to the strangeness of their bodies, the bits of curling hair on their chests, and sometimes on their backs and shoulders, to the broad, flat panes of their stomachs and wings of their hip bones, arcing over the waistband of their pants. But this is different. There is a perfect stillness to him, and in the pale grey light he seems to glow slightly, like a statue carved out of white rock. He is beautiful. He shakes his head a bit and water pinwheels from his hair, a glittering semicircle. Happy and unaware, he starts to hum quietly. All of a sudden I am horribly embarrassed. I'm trespassing on a private moment. I clear my throat loudly. He whips around. When he sees me awake, he jumps out of the stream of water and scoops his clothes up off the platform lip, covering himself with them. I didn't know you were awake, he says, fighting to get his t-shirt on, even though he's soaking wet. He accidentally gets his head caught in an armhole and has to try again. I would laugh if he didn't look so desperate. Now that he has cleaned away the blood, I can see his face clearly. His eyes are no longer swollen, but they are ringed with deep purple bruises. The cuts on his lip and forehead are scabbing over. That's a good sign. I just woke up, I say as he finally gets his shirt on. Did you sleep at all? Now he's wrestling with his jeans. His hair makes a pattern of water spots around the neck of his t-shirt. A little, he says guiltily. I didn't mean to. I must have dropped off around 5. It was already getting light. His jeans are on. He hauls himself up onto the platform, surprisingly graceful. Ready to move on. In a bit, I say. I'd like to get clean, like you did. Under the grates. Okay. Julian nods, but doesn't move. I can feel myself blushing again. It has been a long time since I've felt this way, so open and exposed. I'm losing the thread of the new Lena, the hard one, the warrior made in the wilds. I can't seem to pull myself back into her body. I'll need to get undressed, I blurt out, since Julian doesn't seem to be taking the hint. Oh, right, he stammers, backing away. Of course. I'll go scout ahead. I'll be quick, I say. We should get moving again. I wait until Julian's footsteps are a faint echo in the cavernous space before stepping out of my clothes. For a minute it's possible to forget that the scavengers are somewhere out there in the dark, looking for us. For a minute it's possible to forget what I've done, what I've had to do to escape, to forget the pattern of blood seeping across the storeroom floor, the scavengers' eyes, surprised, accusatory. I stand naked on the lip of the platform, reaching my arms up toward the sky, as ribbons of water continue twisting through the grates, liquid gray, as though the sky has begun to melt. The cold air raises goosebumps on my skin. I lower myself to a crouch and ease myself off the platform, splashing into the tracks, feeling the bite of metal and wood on my bare feet. I slosh my way over to the grates. Then I tip my head back so the rain hits me square in the face and courses down my hair, my back, my aching shoulders and chest. I have never felt anything so amazing in my life. I want to cry out for joy, or sing. The water is icy cold, and smells fresh, as though it has carried some of the scents of its spiraling journey past stripped branches and tiny, new March buds. When I've let the water drive over my face and pool in my eyes and mouth, I lean forward and feel it beat a rhythm on my back, like the drumming of 1,000 tiny feet. I haven't realized until right now how sore I am all over, everything hurts. My legs and arms are covered with dark bruises. I know I'm as clean as I'm going to get, but I can't bring myself to move out of the stream of water, even though the cold makes me shiver. It's a good cold, purifying. Finally I wade back to the platform. It takes me 2 tries to heave myself up off the tracks. That's how weak I am, and I'm dripping water everywhere, leaving a person-sized splatter pattern on the dark concrete. I wrap the long coil of my hair around one hand and squeeze, and even this brings me joy, the normalcy of the action, routine and familiar. I step into the jeans I took from the scavengers, rolling them once at the waist to keep them from falling off, even so, they hang loose from my hip bones. Then, footsteps behind me. I whip around, covering my breasts with my arms. Julian steps out of the shadows. Keeping one arm wrapped around my chest, I grab for my shirt. "Wait," he calls out, and something about the tone of his voice, a note of command, and also of urgency, stops me. "Wait," he repeats, more softly. We're separated by 20 feet of space, but the way he's looking at me makes me feel as though we're chest to chest. I can feel his eyes on my skin like a prickling touch. I know I should put on my shirt, but I can't move. I can hardly even breathe. "I've never been able to look before," Julian says simply, and takes one more step toward me. The light falls differently across his face, and now I can see a softness in his eyes, a blur, and it makes the roaring heat in my body melt away into warmth, a steady, wonderful feeling. At the same time, a tiny voice in the back of my head pipes up, "Danger, danger, danger." Beneath it, a fainter echo, "Alex, Alex, Alex." Alex used to look at me like that. "Your waist is so small." That's all Julian says, in a voice so quiet I barely hear him. I force myself to turn away from him. My hands are shaking as I wrestle the sports bra, and then my shirt, over my head. When I turn around again, I feel afraid of him for some reason. He has come even closer. He smells like rain. He saw me topless, exposed. He looked at me like I was beautiful. "Feeling better?" he asks. "Yeah," I say, dropping my eyes. I finger the cut along my neck carefully. It is about a half-inch long, and clotted with dried blood. "Let me see." Julian reaches out and then hesitates, his fingers an inch from my face. I look up at him. He seems to be asking permission. I nod, and he slips his hand, gently, under my chin, tipping it up so he can look at my neck. "We should bandage it." We are on the same side now. He is refusing to say anything more about the fact that I lied to him, and the fact that I'm uncured. I wonder how long it will last. Julian moves over to the backpack. He rummages for the first aid materials we stole, and returns to me with a large bandage, a bottle of peroxide, some antibacterial ointment, and several cotton puffs. "I can do it," I say, but Julian shakes his head. "Let me," he says. First he dips the cotton balls in the peroxide and dabs the cut carefully. It stings and I jerk back, yelping. He raises his eyebrows. "Come on," he says, hitching his mouth into a smile. "It doesn't hurt that badly." "It does," I insist. "Yesterday you went head-to-head with 2 homicidal maniacs. Now you can't take a little burn." "That's different," I say, glaring at him. I can tell he's making fun of me, and I don't like it. That was a question of survival. Julian raises his eyebrows but doesn't say anything. He blots my cut one more time with the cotton ball, and this time I grit my teeth and bear it. Then he squeezes a thin line of ointment onto the bandage and affixes it carefully to my neck. "Alex fixed me once, just like this. It was on raid night, and we were hiding in a tiny tool shed, and a dog had just taken a chunk out of my leg. I haven't thought about that night in a long time, and as Julian's hands skate over my skin, I feel suddenly breathless. I wonder if this is how people always get clothes, they heal each other's wounds, they repair the broken skin. They're as good as new. His eyes have taken on the grey of the sky above the grates. You okay to move on? I nod, even though I'm still weak, and pretty dizzy. Julian reaches out and squeezes my shoulder. I wonder what he thinks when he touches me, whether he feels the electric pulse that runs through my body. He is unused to having contact with girls, but he doesn't seem bothered by it. He has crossed a boundary. I wonder what he'll do when we finally get out of here. He'll no doubt go back to his old life, to his father, to the DFA. Maybe he'll have me arrested. I feel a surge of nausea and close my eyes, swaying a little on my feet. Are you sure you're okay to move? Julian's voice is so gentle, it makes my chest break up into 1,000 fluttering pieces. This was not part of the plan. This was not supposed to happen. I think about what I told him last night. You're not supposed to know. The hard, unbearable, beautiful truth. Julian, I open my eyes, wishing my voice sounded less shaky. We're not the same. We're on different sides. You know that, right? His eyes get a little harder, more intense, even in the half-light, a blazing blue. But when he speaks, his voice is still soft and quiet. I don't know what side I'm on anymore, he says. He takes another step toward me. Julian, I can barely squeeze out his name. That's when we hear it, a muffled shout from one of the tunnels, the sound of drumming feet. Julian stiffens, and in that second, when we look at each other, there's no need to speak at all. The scavengers are here. The terror is a sudden jolt. The voices are coming from one of the tunnels we came through last night. Julian scoops up the backpack, and I stuff my feet quickly into my sneakers, not even bothering with socks. I grab the knife from the ground. Julian reaches for my other hand and pulls me forward, past the wooden crates and to the far end of the platform. Even 50 feet away from the grates, it's almost impossible to see. We are swallowed again in murk and darkness. It feels like stepping into a mouth, and I try to beat back the feeling of terror winging through me. I know I should be grateful for the darkness and all the chances to hide, but I can't help thinking of what the darkness could be hiding: stealthy, silent steppers, bodies swinging from the pipes. At the far end of the platform there's a tunnel, so low Julian and I have to stoop to enter. After 10 feet, we reach a narrow metal ladder, which takes us down into a broader tunnel, this one studded with old train tracks but free, thankfully, of running water. Every few feet Julian pauses, listening for the scavengers. Then we hear it, unmistakably, and closer now, a voice grunting, "This way." Those 2 words knock the breath out of me, exactly as if I'd been punched. It's albino. I mentally curse myself for putting the handgun in the backpack. Stupid, and no way of getting it now, in the dark, while Julian and I are pushing forward. I squeeze the handle of the knife, taking some reassurance from the smooth grain of its wood, from its weight. But I'm still weak, dizzy, and hungry, too. I know I won't do well in a fight. I say a silent prayer that we can lose them in the darkness. Down here. But the voices grow louder, closer. We hear feet ringing against the metal ladder, a sound that makes my blood sing with terror. Just then I see it, light zigzagging against the walls, flashing yellow tentacles. They're using flashlights, of course. No wonder they're coming so fast. They don't have to worry about being seen or heard. They are the predators. And we are the prey. Hide. It's our only hope. We need to hide. There's an archway on our right, a cutout of even blacker darkness, and I squeeze Julian's hand, pulling him back, directing him through it, into another tunnel, a foot or so lower than the one we've been traveling, and this one dotted with puddles of stagnant, stinking water. We grope our way through the dark. The walls on both sides of us are smooth, no alcoves, no piled wooden crates, nothing to conceal us, and the panic is building. Julian must be feeling it too, because he loses his footing, stumbles, and splashes heavily into one of the narrow beds of still water. Both of us freeze. The scavengers, too, freeze. Their footsteps stop, their voices fall silent. And then the light seeps through the archway, a creeping, sniffing animal, roving the ground, ravenous. Julian and I don't move. He pulses my hand, once, then releases it. I hear him shift the backpack from his shoulder and know that he must be fumbling for a weapon. There's no longer any point in running. There's no point in fighting, either, not really, but at least we can take a scavenger or two down with us. My vision goes suddenly blurry and I'm startled. Tears sting my eyes, and I have to wipe them away with the inside of my wrist. All I can think is not here, not like this, not underground, not with the rats. The light widens and expands, a second beam joins it. The scavengers are moving silently now, but I can feel them taking their time, and enjoying it, the way a hunter draws his bow back the last few inches before releasing an arrow, those final moments of quiet and stillness before the kill. I can feel the albino. Even in the dark, I know he is smiling. My palms are wet on the knife. Next to me, Julian is breathing heavily. Not like this. Not like this. My head is full of echoes now, fragments and distortions, the heady smell of honeysuckle in the summer, fat, droning bees, trees bowed low under the weight of heavy snowfall, Hannah running ahead of me, laughing, her blonde hair swinging in an arc. And strangely, what strikes me then in that exact second, as I know with solid certainty that I am going to die, is that all the kisses I have ever had are behind me. The deliria, the pain, all the trouble it has caused, everything we have been fighting for me it is done, washed away on the tide of my life. And then, just as the beams of light grow to headlights huge, blinding, bearing down on us, and the shadows behind them unfold and become people, I am filled with desperate rage. I can't see, the light has dazzled me, and the darkness has melted into explosions of color, spots of floating brightness, and dimly, as I leap forward, thrusting blindly with my knife, I hear shouting and roaring and a scream that bursts through my chest, winds through my teeth like the reverberation of a metal blade. Everything is chaos, hot bodies and panting. There's an elbow in my chest and thick arms encircling me, choking out my breath. I get a mouthful of greasy hair, a blade of pain in my side, foul breath in my face, and guttural shouts. I can't tell how many scavengers there are, 3, 4, and don't know where Julian is. I am striking without looking, struggling to breathe, and everything is body's hardness and enclosure, no way to run, no way to break free, and the slashing of my knife. I hit flesh, and then the knife gets wrenched from my hand, wrist twisted until I cry out. Enormous hands find my neck and squeeze, and the air goes out of the tunnel, and shrivels to the point of a pen in my lungs. I open my mouth to gasp and find that I can't. In the darkness above me I see a tiny bubble of light, of air, floating high above me. I am reaching for it, fighting my way out of a thick, consuming murk, but there is nothing but mud in my lungs and I am drowning. Drowning. Dying. Faintly I hear a tiny drumming, a constant pitter-patter, and think that it must once again be raining. Then there are lights blazing again on either side of me, dancing, mobile light, twisting and live. Fire. Suddenly the circle around my neck breaks. The air is like cold water washing into me, making me gasp and splutter. I sink to my hands and knees, and for one confused second I think I must be dreaming. I fall into a stream of fur, a blur of tiny bodies. Then my head begins to clear and the world returns from the fog and I realize the tunnel is filled with rats. Hundreds and hundreds of them, rats leaping over one another, wriggling and writhing, colliding with my wrists and nipping at my knees. 2 gunshots explode, someone cries out in pain. Above me there are shapes, people, grappling with the scavengers. They have enormous, smoldering torches, stinking like dirty oil, and they scythe through the air with their fire like farmers cutting through fields of wheat. Various images are frozen, briefly illuminated. Julian doubled over, one hand on the tunnel wall, one of the scavengers, face contorted, screaming, her hair lit up with fire like one of the torches. This is a new kind of terror. I'm frozen on my knees as the rats rush around me, drumming me with their bodies, squeaking and slithering and whipping my skin with their tails. I'm sickened and paralyzed with fear. This is a nightmare. It must be. A rat crawls up onto my lap. I shout and swat it away, nausea rising in my throat. It hits the wall with a sickening thud, squeaking, then it scrabbles back to its feet and joins the stream again, blurring past me. I'm so disgusted I can't even move. A whimper works its way out of my throat. Maybe I've died and gone to hell, to be punished for Delirium and all the terrible things I've done to live in squalor and chaos, just like the book of SHHH predicts for the disobedient. Stand up. I raise my head. 2 monsters stand above me, holding torches. That's what they look like, beasts from the underground, only half human. One of them is enormous, practically a giant. One of his eyes is milky white, blinded, the other is as darkly glittering as an animal's. The other figure is hunched over, back as crookedly swollen as the warped hull of a boat. I can't tell if it's a man or a woman. Long, greasy hair mostly conceals the person's face. She or he has twisted Julian's hands behind his back and bound them with a cord. The scavengers are gone. I stand. The bandage on my neck has come loose, and my skin feels slick and wet. Walk, the rat man gestures with his torch toward the darkness behind me. I see that he is slightly doubled over and is clutching his right side with the hand not holding the torch. I think of the gunshots and hearing someone shout. I wonder if he was hit. Listen. My voice is shaking. I hold up both hands, a gesture of peace. I don't know who you are, or what you want, but we're just trying to get out of here. We don't have much, but you can take whatever you want. Just let us go. Please, okay. My voice breaks a little. Please let us go. Walk, the rat man repeats, and this time jabs so close to me with his torch I can feel the heat from the flames. I look at Julian. He gives a minute shake of his head. The expression in his eyes is clear. What can we do? I turn, and walk. The rat man goes behind me with his torch, and in front of us, hundreds of rats disappear into the darkness. Chapter then. No one knows what to expect at the third encampment, or whether there will even be a third encampment. Since Tack and Hunter never made it home, we can't know whether they successfully buried supplies just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, roughly 180 miles south of Rochester, or whether something happened to them along the way. The cold has buried its claws in the landscape now, it is relentless, and will not let go until spring. We are tired, hungry, and defeated. Even Raven can't maintain the appearance of strength. She walks slowly, head bowed, not speaking. I don't know what we'll do if there is no food at the third encampment. I know Raven is worried too, although she won't talk about it. None of us talk about it. We just push blindly, obstinately forward. But the fear is there. As we approach Hartford, threading through the ruins of old towns, bombed out shells of houses, like dry insect husks, there is no sense of celebration. Instead there is anxiety, a hum of it, running through all of us, making the woods feel ominous. The dusk is full of malice, the shadows are long, pointed fingers, a forest of dark hands. Tomorrow we will reach the third encampment, if it is there. If not, some of us will starve before we make it farther south. And if it is not there, we can stop wondering about Tack and Hunter. It will mean that in all probability they are dead. The morning dawns weakly and is full of strange electricity, like the waiting feeling that usually precedes a storm. Other than the crunching of our shoes in the snow, we move in silence. Finally we reach it, the place where the third encampment should be. There is no sign that Tack and Hunter have been here, no gouges in the trees, no tattered pieces of fabric looped over tree branches, none of the symbols we've been using to communicate, and no indication that any goods or supplies have been buried here. This is what we've all feared, but still the disappointment is almost physical. Raven lets out a short exclamation of pain, as though she's been slapped. Sarah collapses, right there in the snow, and says, "No no 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 no," until Lu tells her to shut up. I feel as though my chest has caved in. There must be a mistake, I say. My voice sounds too loud in the clearing. We must be in the wrong place. There's no mistake, Bram says in a low voice. This is it. No, I insist. We took a wrong turn somewhere. Or Tack found a better place for the supplies. Be quiet, Lena, Raven says. She's rubbing her temples, hard. Her fingernails are ringed with purple. I need to think. We need to find Tack. I know I'm not helping, I know I'm half hysterical. But the cold and the hunger have turned my thoughts dull too, and this is the only one that stands out. Tack has our food. We need to find him. We need to. I break off as Bram says, "Shhh." Sarah scrambles to her feet again. Suddenly we are all tense, alert. We all heard it, the crack of a twig in the woods, sharp as a rifle report. As I look around at us, all of our faces still and listening, anxious, I'm reminded of the deer we saw 2 days ago in the woods, the way it froze, and tensed, just before bounding away. The woods are stark still, brush strokes of straight black leafless trees. Expanses of white, collapsed logs and rotten tree trunks hunched in the snow. Then, as I am watching, one of the logs from a distance, just a mass of grey and brown, twitches. And I know that something is very, very wrong. I open my mouth to say so, but in that exact second everything explodes. Scavengers appear from all around us, shaking off their cloaks and furs, trees becoming people. Becoming arms and knives and spears, and we are scattering, running, screaming in all directions. This is, of course, how they want us, panicked, weak, and separated. We are easier to kill that way. Chapter now. The tunnel we are following slopes downward. For a minute I imagine that we are tunneling toward the center of the earth. From up ahead, there is light and movement, a fiery glow, and sounds of banging and babbling. My neck is wet with sweat, and the dizziness is worse than ever. I am having trouble staying on my feet. I trip and barely manage to right myself. Ratman steps forward and seizes one of my arms. I try to wrench away from his grasp, but he keeps one hand firmly on my elbow, walking beside me now. He smells terrible. The light breaks, expands, and becomes a cavernous room filled with fire and people. The ceiling above us is vaulted, and we emerge from the darkness into a space with tall platforms on either side of us. On them, more monsters, tattered, ragged, dirty people, all of them bloodless and pale, squinting and hobbled move among metal trash cans where several fires are burning, so the air is clotted with smoke and an old, oily smell. The walls are tiled, and papered with faded advertisements and graffiti. As we advance along the tracks, people turn and stare. They are all withered or damaged in some way. Many of them are missing limbs, or have other kinds of defects, shriveled infant hands, strange tumor growths on their faces, curved spines, or crippled knees. Up, the rat man says, jerking his chin toward the platform. It is impossibly high. Julian's hands are still tied behind his back. Two of the larger men on the platform come forward and grab him under the armpits, help haul him up out of the tracks. The hunchback moves with surprising grace. I get a glimpse of strong arms and delicate, tapered wrists. A woman, then. I can't, I say. The people on the platforms have stopped now. They are staring at Julian and me. It's too high. Up, Ratman repeats. I wonder if these are the only words he knows. Stand, walk, up, down. The platform is at eye level. I place my hands flat on the concrete and try to heave myself up, but I'm far too weak. I collapse backward. She's hurt. Julian cries out. Can't you see that? For God's sake, we need to get out of here. It's the first time he has spoken since the scavengers tracked us down, and his voice is full of pain and fear. The rat man is piloting me back toward the platform, but this time, as though by silent agreement, some of the observers move simultaneously forward. Toward us. They crouch at the platform lip, they reach out their arms. I try and twist away, but the rat man is behind me. He grabs me firmly by the waist. Stop it. Now Julian is trying to break free of his captors. The two men who helped him onto the platform are still holding him firmly. Let her go. Hands are grabbing me from all directions. Monstrous faces loom above me, floating in the flickering light. Julian is still screaming. Do you hear me? Get off her. Let her go. A woman comes through the crowd toward me. She seems to be missing part of her face. Her mouth is twisted into a horrible grin. No, I want to scream. Hands are gripping me, lifting me onto the platform. I kick out, there is a release. I land hard on my side, rolling onto my back. The woman with the half-face looms over me. She reaches for me with both hands. She is going to strangle me. Get away from me. I scream out, flailing, trying to push her away. My head smacks back against the platform, and for a second my vision explodes with color. Be still, she is saying, in a soothing voice, a lullaby voice, surprisingly gentle as the pain stops, and the screaming stops, and I drift away into a fog. Chapter then. We scatter, panicked and blind. We've had no time to load our weapons, and we have no strength to fight. My knife is in my pack, useless to me now. No time to stop and retrieve it. The scavengers are fast and strong, bigger, I think, than any normal people should be, bigger than anybody should be who makes a home in the wilds. This way. This way. Raven runs ahead of me, dragging Sarah by the hand. Sarah is too scared to cry. She can barely keep up with Raven. She is stumbling in the snow. Terror is a heartbeat drumming in my chest. There are 3 scavengers behind us. One of them has an axe. I can hear the blade whistling in the air. My throat is burning, and with each step I sink 6 inches, have to wrench my legs forward. My thighs are shaking from the effort. We come over a hill and suddenly, looming ahead of us, there is an outcropping of rock, large boulders shouldering together at angles like people crowding together for warmth. The rocks are slick with ice and form a series of interlinking caves, dark mouths where the snow has not penetrated. There is no way to go around them, or climb over them. We will be caught there, pinioned, like animals in a corral. Raven freezes for just a second, and I can see the terror in her whole body. A scavenger lunges for her, and I cry out. She unfreezes, dragging Sarah forward again, running straight for the rock because there is nowhere else to run. I see her fumbling at her belt for her long knife. Her fingers are clumsy, frozen solid. She can't work it out of its pouch, and I realize, heart sinking, that she intends to make a stand. That is her only plan. We will die out here, and our blood will seep into the snow. My throat is grating, aching, bare branches whip my face, stinging my eyes with tears. A scavenger is close to me now, so close I can hear his heavy panting and see his shadow running in tandem with mine. To our left, twin figures cast long on the snow, and in that moment, just before he catches up to me, I think of Hannah. Two shadows on the Portland streets, sun hot and high, legs beating in tandem. Then there is no place left to run. Go! Raven is screaming, as she pushes Sarah forward into a dark space, one of the caves made by the rocks. Sarah is small enough to fit. Hopefully the scavengers will not be able to get to her. Then there is a hand on my back, and I am tumbling roughly to my knees, teeth ringing as I bite down on ice. I roll onto my back, 6 inches from the wall of sheer rock. He is above me, a giant, a leering monster. He raises his axe, and its blade glitters in the sun. I'm too scared to move, to breathe, to cry. He tenses, ready to swing. I close my eyes. A rifle shot explodes in the silence, then 2 more. I open my eyes and see the scavenger above me collapse to one side, like a puppet whose strings have been suddenly cut. His axe falls blade first in the snow. 2 other scavengers have fallen and 2, pierced cleanly with bullets, their blood is spreading against the whiteness. Then I see them, Tack and Hunter jogging toward us, rifles in hand, thin and pale and haggard and alive. Chapter now. When I come to, I'm lying on my back on a dingy sheet. Julian is kneeling next to me, his hands unbound. How are you feeling? All of a sudden I remember the rats, the monsters, the woman with the half face. I struggle to sit up. Little fireworks of pain go off in my head. Easy, easy. Julian puts his arm under my shoulders and helps move me into a seated position. You cracked your head pretty badly. What happened? We are sitting in an area that has been partially blocked off by dismantled cardboard boxes. All along the platform, flowered sheets are strung up between broken slats of plywood, offering some privacy to the squatters inside. Mattresses have been placed inside enormous, sagging cardboard structures. Walls and blockades have been made by interlocking broken chairs and 3-legged tables. The air is still hot, stinking of ash and oil. I watch the smoke trace a line along the ceiling, before getting sucked up and out through a tiny vent. They cleaned you up, Julian says quietly, in a tone of disbelief. At first I thought they were going to. He breaks off, shaking his head. But then a woman came, with bandages and everything. She wrapped up your neck. It was bleeding again. I touch my neck, it has been taped up with thick gauze. They've taken care of Julian, too, the cut on his lip has been cleaned, and the bruises on his eyes are less swollen. Who are these people? I say. What is this place? Julian shakes his head again. Invalids. Seeing me flinch, he adds, I don't know any other word for them. For you. We're not the same, I say, watching the bent and crippled figures moving beyond the smoky fire. Something is cooking, I can smell it. I don't want to think about what kind of food they eat down here. What kind of animals they manage to trap. I think of the rats, and my stomach lurches. Don't you get that yet? We're all different. We want different things. We live different ways. That's the whole point. Julian opens his mouth to respond, but at that moment the monster woman appears, the one I tried to fight off at the edge of the platform. She pushes aside the cardboard barricade, and it strikes me that they must have arranged it that way so Julian and I would have some privacy. You're awake, the woman says. Now that I'm not so terrified, I see that she's not missing part of her face. As I imagined, the right side of her face is just much smaller than the left, collapsed inward, as though her face is composed of two different masks, imperfectly joined. Birth defect, I think, even though I've seen only a few defectives in my life, and all of them were in textbooks. In school we were always taught that kids born from the uncured would end up like this, crippled and mangled in some way. The priests told us this was the delirium manifesting in their bodies. Children born of the healthy and the whole are healthy and whole, children born of the disease will have sickness in their bones and blood. All these people, born crippled or bent or misshapen, have been driven underground. I wonder what would have happened to them as babies, as children, if they had stayed above ground. I remember, then, what Raven told me about finding Blue. You know what they say about deliria babies, she would probably be taken and killed. She wouldn't even be buried. She'd be burned, and packed up with the waste. The woman doesn't wait for me to answer before kneeling in front of me. Julian and I are both silent. I want to say something to her, but I don't have the words. I want to look away from her face, but I can't. Thank you, I finally manage. Her eyes flick to mine. They are brown and webbed with fine lines. She has a permanent squint, probably from existing in this strange, twilight world. How many were they? She asks. I would have expected her voice to be mangled and broken, a reflection of her face, but it is high and clear. Pretty. When I don't immediately respond, she says, the intruders. How many? I know immediately that she is referring to the scavengers, though she uses a different word to describe them. I can tell from the way she says it, the mixture of anger, fear, and disgust. I'm not sure, I say. 7, at least. Maybe more. The woman says, they came 3 seasons ago. Maybe 4. I must look surprised by her way of speaking, because she adds, it isn't easy to keep track of time in the tunnel's days, weeks unless we go above, it's hard to know. How long have you been down here? I ask, almost afraid to know the answer. She squints at me with those small, sludge-colored eyes. I do my best not to look at her mouth and chin. There, the deformity is at its worst, as though her face is curling up into itself, a wilting flower. I've been here always, she says. Or almost always. How? The question gets caught in my throat. She smiles. I think it's a smile, at least. One corner of her mouth corkscrews upward. There is nothing for us on the surface, she says. Nothing but death, anyway. So it's like I thought. I wonder if that's what always happens to the babies who don't find their way underground, or to a homestead in the wilds. Maybe they get locked in prisons and mental institutions. Maybe they are simply killed. For all my life, the tunnels have belonged to us, she says. I'm still having a hard time reconciling the melody of her voice with the look of her face. I focus on her eyes, even in the dim, smoky light, I can see that they are full of warmth. People find their way to us with babies. This is a safe place for them. Her eyes flick to Julian, and I notice her scan his unblemished neck, then she's back to me. You've been cured, she says. That's what they call it above ground, right? I nod. I open my mouth to try and explain I'm okay, I'm on your side, but to my surprise, Julian speaks up. We're not with the intruders, he says. We're not with anyone else. We're on our own. We're not with anyone else. I know he's just saying it to appease her, but the words still buoy me up, help break apart the knot of fear that has been lodged in my chest since we've been underground. Then I think of Alex, and I feel nauseous all over again. I wish that we had never left the wilds. I wish that I had never agreed to join the resistance. How did you come here? The woman says. She pours from a jug next to me, and offers me a plastic cup, a child's cup, with faded patterns of deer prancing around its rim. This, like everything else down here, must have floated in from above, discarded, unwanted, drifting through the cracks of the earth like a melting snow. We were taken. Julian's voice gets stronger now. Kidnapped by the intruders. He hesitates, and I know that he's thinking about the DFA badges. We found the tattoo I saw. He doesn't understand yet, and I don't either, but I know this was not merely the effort of scavengers. They were paid or were supposed to be paid for their trouble. We don't know why, he says. We're trying to find our way out, I say, and then something that the woman said earlier strikes me, and I feel a sudden surge of hope. Wait, you said. You have trouble keeping track of time unless you go above ground, right? So, there's a way out? A way up. I don't go above ground, she says. The way she says above makes it sound like a dirty word. But somebody does, I persist. Somebody must. They must have ways of getting supplies, sheets and cups and fuel and all the piles of half-used, broken down furniture heaped around us on the platform. Yes, she says evenly. Of course. Will you take us? I ask. My throat is dry. Just thinking about the sun, and the space, and the surface, makes me want to cry. I don't know what will happen once we're above again, but I push away the thought. You're still very weak, she says. You need to eat and rest. I'm okay, I insist. I can walk. I try to stand up, and find my vision clouding with black. I thud back down. Lena. Julian puts a hand on my arm. Something flickers in his eyes. Trust me, it's okay, a little longer won't kill us. I don't know what's happening, or how we've begun to communicate in silence, or why I like it so much. He turns to the woman. We'll rest for a bit. Then will someone show us the way to the surface? The woman once again looks from Julian to me and back again. Then she nods. You don't belong down here, she says. She climbs to her feet. I feel suddenly humbled. All these people make a life from trash and broken things, living in darkness, breathing in smoke. And yet, they helped us. They helped us without knowing us, and for no reason at all other than the fact that they knew how. I wonder whether I would do the same, if I were in their position. I'm not sure. Alex would have, I think. And then, Julian would too. Wait. Julian calls her back. We didn't get your name. A look of surprise crosses her face, then she smiles again, the little corkscrew lips. I was named down here, she says. They call me Coin. Julian wrinkles his forehead, but I get it right away. It's an invalid name, descriptive, easy to remember, funny, kind of sick. Coin, as in two-sided. Coin was right, time is hard to measure in the tunnels, even harder than it was to measure in the cell. At least there we had the electric light to guide us. On during day, off at night. Every minute down here becomes an hour. Julian and I eat 3 granola bars each, and some more of the jerky we stole from the scavengers. Stash. It feels like a feast, and before I'm even finished, my stomach is cramping badly. Still, after eating, and drinking the whole jug of water, I feel better than I have in days. We doze for a bit lying so close I can feel Julian's breath stirring my hair, our legs almost touching, and we both wake at the same time. Coin is standing above us again. She has refilled the jug of water. Julian utters a little cry as he is shaking himself into awareness. Then he sits up quickly, embarrassed. He runs his hands through his hair so it sticks up at crazy angles, every which way. I have an overwhelming urge to reach out and smooth it down. Can you walk? Coin asks me. I nod. I'll have someone take you to the surface, then. Again, she says surface as though it's a dirty word, or a curse. Thank you. The words seem thin and insufficient. You didn't need to, I mean, we really appreciate it. We'd probably be dead if it weren't for you and your friends. I almost say your people, but I catch myself at the last minute. I remember how angry I've been with Julian for saying the same thing. She stares at me for a moment without smiling, and I wonder if, somehow, I've offended her. Like I said, you don't belong down here, she says. And then, her voice swelling, rising to a high pitch, there's a place for everything and everyone, you know. That is the mistake they make above. They think that only certain people have a place. Only certain kinds of people belong. The rest is waste. But even waste must have a place. Otherwise it will clog and clot and rot and fester. A small tremor passes through her body, her right hand tugs convulsively at the folds of her dirty dress. I'll find someone to guide you, she says abruptly, as though ashamed of her outburst, and turns away from us. Ratman is the one who comes for us, and seeing him brings back a sense of vertigo and nausea, even though this time he is alone. The rats have gone back to their holes and hiding places. Coin said you want to go up, he says, the longest sentence I have heard from him yet. Julian and I are already standing. Julian has taken the backpack, and though I've told him I'm okay to stand, he insists on keeping a hand on my arm. Just in case, he said, and I think of how different he is from the boy I saw on stage in the Javits Center, the cool floating screen image unimaginable that they should be the same person. I wonder whether that boy is the real Julian, or this boy is the real one, or whether it's even possible to know. Then it hits me, I'm not even sure who the real Lena is anymore. We're ready, Julian says. We pick our way around the piles of junk and the makeshift shelters that clutter the platform. Everywhere we go, we are watched. Figures crouch in the shadows. They've been forced down here, the way we have been forced into the wilds, all for a society of order and regularity. For a society to be healthy, not a single one of its members can be sick. The DFA's philosophy runs deeper, much deeper than I'd believed. They dangerous are not just the uncured, they are also the different, the deformed, the abnormal. They must also be eradicated. I wonder if Julian realizes this, or whether he's known it all along. Irregularity must be regulated, Dirt must be cleansed. The laws of physics teach us that systems tend increasingly toward chaos, and so the chaos must be constantly pushed back. The rules of expurgation are even written into the book of SHHH. At the end of the platform, the rat man swings down into the tracks. He is walking well now. If he was injured during the scuffle with the scavengers, he, too, has been mended and bandaged. Julian follows, and then helps me down, reaching up and putting his hands around my waist as I maneuver clumsily off the platform. Even though I feel better than I did earlier, I'm still not moving very well. I've been too long without enough food and water, and my head still throbs. My left ankle wobbles as I hit the ground, and for a minute I stumble against Julian, bumping my chin on his chest, and his arms tighten around me. "You okay?" he says. I'm ultra conscious of the closeness of our bodies, and the encircling warmth of his arms. I step away from him, my heart climbing into my mouth. "I'm fine," I say. Then it's time to go into the darkness again. I hang back, and Ratman must think I'm scared. He turns and says, "The intruders don't come this far. Don't worry. He's without a flashlight or a torch." I wonder if the fire was just meant to intimidate the scavengers. The mouth of the tunnel is pitch black, but he seems perfectly able to see. "Let's go," Julian says, and I turn with him and follow the rat man, and the dim beam of the flashlight, into the dark. We walk in silence, although the rat man occasionally stops, making clicking motions with his tongue, like a man calling a dog. Once he crouches, and pulls bits of crushed crackers from the pockets of his coat, scattering them on the ground between the wooden slats of the tracks. From the corners of the tunnel the rats emerge, sniffing his fingers, fighting over the crumbs, hopping up into his cupped palms and running up over his arms and shoulders. It is terrible to watch, but I can't look away. "How long have you been here?" Julian asks, after the ratman has straightened up again. Now all around us we hear the chittering of tiny teeth and nails, and the flashlight lights up quick-moving, writhing shadows. I have a sudden terror that the rats are all around me, even on the ceilings. "Don't know," the rat man says. "Lost count." Unlike the other people who have made their home on the platform, he has no noticeable physical deformities except for his single milk-white eye. I can't help but blurt out, "Why?" He turns abruptly back to me. For a minute Ratman doesn't say anything, and the three of us stand there in the stifling dark. My breath is coming quickly, rasping in my throat. "I didn't want to be cured," he says at last, and the words are so normal a vocabulary from my world, a debate from above that relief breaks in my chest. He's not crazy after all. Why not? That's Julian. Another pause. "I was already sick," the rat man says, and although I can't see his face, I can hear that he is smiling just a little bit. I wonder if Julian is as surprised as I am. It occurs to me, then, that people themselves are full of tunnels, winding, dark spaces and caverns, impossible to know all the places inside of them. Impossible even to imagine. What happened? Julian persists. "She was cured," the rat man says shortly, and turns his back to us, resuming the walk and I chose. "This. Here. Wait, wait." Julian tugs me along. We have to jog a little to catch up. "I don't understand. You were infected together, and then she was cured." "Yes. And you chose this instead." Julian shakes his head. "You must have seen. I mean, it would have taken away the pain." There's a question in Julian's words, and I know then that he is struggling, still clinging to his old beliefs, the ideas that have comforted him for so long. "I didn't see." The rat man has increased his pace. He must have the tunnel's twists and dips memorized. Julian and I can barely keep up. I didn't see her at all after that. I don't understand, Julian says, and for a second my heart aches for him. He is my age, but there is so much he doesn't know. The rat man stops. He doesn't look at us, but I see his shoulders rise and fall. An inaudible sigh. They'd already taken her from me once, he says quietly. I didn't want to lose her again. I have the urge to lay my hand on his shoulder and say, I understand. But the words seem stupid. We can never understand. We can only try, fumbling our way through the tunneled places, reaching for light. But then he says, we're here, and steps to the side, so the flashlight's beam falls on a rusted metal ladder, and before I can think of anything else to say, he has hopped onto its lowest rung and started climbing toward the surface. Soon the rat man is fiddling with a metal cover in the ceiling. As he slides it open, the light is so dazzling and unexpected I cry out for a second, and have to turn away, blinking, while spots of color revolve in my vision. The rat man heaves himself up and out through the hole, then reaches down to help me. Julian follows last. We've emerged onto a large, open-air platform. There is a train track below us, torn up, a thicket of mangled iron and wood. At some point, it must descend into the underground tunnels. The platform is streaked with bird shit. Pigeons are roosting everywhere, on the peeled paint benches, in the old trash bins, between the tracks. A sun-faded and wind-battered sign must at one point have listed the station name. It is illegible now, but for a few letters, H, O, B, K old tags stain the walls. My life, my choice, says 1. Another reads, Keep America safe. Old slogans, old signs of the fight between the believers and the non-believers. What is this place? I say to Rat Man. He's crouching by the black mouth of the hole that leads below. He has flipped his hood up to shield his eyes from the sun, and he seems desperate to leap back into the darkness. This is the first time I've had a chance to really look at him, and I see now he is much younger than I'd imagined. Other than faint, criss-crossed lines at the corners of his eyes, his face is smooth and unlined. His skin is so pale it has the blue tint of milk, and his eyes are fuzzy and unfocused, unused to so much light. This is the landfill, he says, pointing. About 100 yards off, in the direction he indicates, is a tall chain-link fence, beyond which we can see a mound of glittering trash and metal. Manhattan is across the river. The landfill, I repeat slowly. Of course, the underground people must have a way to gather supplies. The landfill would be perfect, heaps and heaps of discarded food, supplies, wiring, and furniture. I feel a jolt of recognition. I scramble to my feet. I know where we are, I say. There's a homestead nearby. A what? Julian squints up at me, but I'm too excited. I jog down the platform, my breath steaming in front of me, lifting my arm to shield my eyes from the sun. The landfill is enormous, several miles square, Tack told me, to service all of Manhattan and its sister cities, but we must be at its northern end. There's a gravel road that winds away from its gates, through the ruins of old, bombed-out buildings. This trash pit was once a city itself. And less than a mile away is a homestead. Raven, Tack, and I lived here for a month while we were waiting for papers and our final instructions from the resistance about relocation and reabsorption. At the homestead there will be food, and water, and clothing. There will be a way to contact Raven and Tack, too. When we lived there we used radio signals, and, when those got too dangerous, different colored cloths, which we raised on the flagpole just outside of a burned-out local school. "This is where I leave you," Ratman says. He has swung his lower body back into the hole. I can tell he's desperate to get out of the sun and go back to safety. "Thank you," I say. The words seem stupidly insufficient, but I can't think of any others. The Ratman nods and is about to swing himself down the ladder when Julian stops him. "We didn't get your name," Julian says. The Ratman's lips twitch into a smile. "I don't have one," he says. Julian looks startled. "Everyone has a name," he says. "Not anymore," the Ratman says with that twitchy smile. "Names don't mean a thing anymore. The past is dead. The past is dead." Ravens refrain. It makes my throat go dry. I am not so different from these underground people after all. "Be careful," the Ratman says, and his eyes go unfocused again. "They're always watching." Then he drops down into the hole. A second later the iron cover slides into place. For a moment, Julian and I stand in silence, staring at each other. "We did it," Julian says finally, smiling at me. He is standing a little ways down the platform, the sun streaking his hair with white and gold. A bird darts across the sky behind him, a fast-moving shadow against the blue. There are small white flowers pushing up between the cracks in the platform. Suddenly I find that I am crying. I am sobbing with gratitude and relief. We made it out, and the sun is still shining, and the world still exists. "Hey!" Julian comes over to me. He hesitates for a second, then reaches out and rubs my back, moving his hand in slow circles. "Hey, it's okay. It's okay, Lena." I shake my head. I want to tell him that I know, and that's why I'm crying, but I can't speak. He pulls me into him and I cry into his t-shirt and we stand there like that, in the sun, in the outside world, where these things are illegal. And all around us there is silence, except for the occasional twittering of birds, and the rustle of pigeons around the empty platform. Finally I pull away. For a second I think I see movement behind him, in the shadows beyond one of the station's old stairwells, but then I'm sure I've only imagined it. The light is unrelenting. I can't imagine what I must look like right now. Despite the fact that the underground people have cleaned and treated Julian's wounds, his face is still patterned with bruises, a multicolored patchwork. I'm sure I look just as bad, if not worse. Below ground, we've been all IES, friends. Above ground, I'm not sure what we are, and I feel uneasy. Thankfully, he breaks the tension. "So you know where we are," he says. I nod. "I know where we can get help from my people." To his credit, he doesn't flinch. "Let's go, then," he says. He follows me down into the tracks. We startle the pigeons from their roost, and they whirl up around us, a blurry, feathered hurricane. We pick our way over the train tracks and onto the high grass beyond it, bleached pale from the sun and still sheathed in frost. The ground is hard and webbed with ice, although here, too, there is evidence of spring growth, small, curled buds of green, a few early flowers scattered among the dirt. The sun is warm on our necks, but the wind is icy. I wish I had something warmer than a sweatshirt. The cold reaches right through the cotton, grabs onto my insides, and pulls. Finally the landscape becomes familiar. The sun draws stark shadows on the ground, towering, splintered shapes of bombed-out buildings. We pass an old street sign, doubled over, that once pointed the way to Columbia Avenue. Columbia Avenue is now nothing more than broken slabs of concrete, and frozen grass, and a carpet of minuscule shards of glass, shattered into a reflective dust. Here it is, I say. Right up here. I start jogging. The entrance to the homestead is no more than 20 yards away, beyond a twist in the road. And yet, there's another feeling drilling through me, some inner alarm sounding quietly. Convenient. That's the word that keeps floating through my mind. Convenient that we ended up so close to the homestead, convenient that the tunnels led us here. Too convenient to be a coincidence. I push away the thought. We turn the corner and there it is. Just like that, all my concerns get whipped away on a surge of joy. Julian stops, but I go straight up to the door, recharged, full of energy. Most homesteads, at least the ones I've seen, have been built out of hidden places, basements and cellars and bomb shelters and bank vaults that remained intact during the Blitz. We have populated them like insects reclaiming the land. But this homestead was built long after the Blitz was over. Raven told me it was one of the very first homesteads, and the headquarters of the first ragtag group of resistors, who scavenged for materials and built a quasi-house, a weird patchwork structure made from timber, concrete, stone, and metal. The whole place has a junky look, a Frankenstein facade, like it shouldn't possibly be standing. But stand it does. So, I say, turning back to Julian. You coming or what? I've never. It's not possible. Julian shakes his head, as though trying to rouse himself from a dream. This isn't at all what I used to imagine. We can build something out of almost anything out of scrap, I say, and I remember, then, when Raven said almost the exact same thing to me after my escape, when I was sick and weak and unsure whether I wanted to live or die. That was a half a year and a lifetime ago. For a second I feel a rush of sadness, for the horizons that vanish behind us, for the people we leave behind, the tiny doll selves that get stored away and ultimately buried. Julian's eyes are electric now, a mirror of the sky, and he turns to me. Up until 2 years ago, I thought it was all a fairy tale. The wilds, the invalids. He takes 2 steps and suddenly we are standing very close. You. I never would have believed it. We are still separated by several inches, but I feel as though we are touching. There is an electricity between us that collapses the space between our bodies. I'm real, I say, and the electricity is an itch, a nervous jumping under my skin. I feel too exposed. It is too bright, and too quiet. Julian says, I don't think I'm not sure I can go back. His eyes are full of watery depth. I want to look away, but I can't. I feel as though I am falling. I don't know what you're saying. I force the words out. I mean, There is a loud bang from our right, as though someone has kicked something over. Julian breaks off, and I see his body tense. Instinctively, I push him behind me, toward the door, and wrestle the handgun from my backpack. I scan the area, all shrapnel and stone, DIPs and depressions, plenty of places to hide. The hair is standing up on my neck, and my whole body is in alarm now. They are always watching. We stand in agonizing silence. The wind lifts a plastic bag across the brittle ground. It makes 3 slow revolutions, then settles at the base of a long disabled street lamp. Suddenly there is a flicker of movement to my left. I turn around with a cry, gripping the gun, as a cat darts out from behind a mound of cinder block. Julian exhales, and I loosen my hold on the gun, letting the tension flow out of my body. The cat, skinny and wide-eyed, pauses, turning its head in our direction. It meows piteously. Julian touches my shoulders lightly, with both hands, and I jerk away quickly, instinctively. Come on, I say. I can tell I've hurt his feelings. I was about to say something, Julian says. I can feel him searching for my eyes, willing me to look at him, but I am already at the door, fiddling with the rusty handle. You can tell me later, I say as I lean in against the door. It gives, finally, and Julian has no choice but to follow me inside. I am scared about what Julian has to say, and what he will choose, and where he will go. But I am terrified by what I want, for him, and worst of all, from him. Because I do want. I'm not even sure what, exactly, but the want is there, just like the hate and anger were there before. But this is not a tower. It is an endless, tunneling pit, it drives deep, and opens a hole inside me. Chapter then. Tack and Hunter weren't able to salvage many supplies from the Rochester homestead. The bombs and ensuing fires did their job. But they did find a few things miraculously preserved among the smoking rubble, cans of beans, some additional weapons, traps, and, weirdly, one whole, entirely unmelted chocolate bar. Tack insists that it remain uneaten. He straps it to his backpack, like a good luck charm. Sarah eyes it as we walk. It does seem like the chocolate brings good luck, or maybe it's just having Tack and Hunter back, and the way it changes Raven's mood. The weather holds. It's still cold, but we're all grateful for the sun. The beans are enough to give us energy to move on, and only a half day after we've left the last encampment we stumble upon a single house, entirely preserved, in the middle of the woods. It must have been miles from any major road when it was built, and it looks like a mushroom sprouting up from the ground. Its walls are covered in brown ivy, thick as fur, and its roof is low and round, pulled down like a hat. This would have been a hermit's house, back before the Blitz, far away from everyone else. No wonder it survived intact. The bombers would have missed it, and even the fires might not have spread this far. 4 invalids have made it their home. They invite us to camp on their grounds. There are 2 men and 2 women, as well as 5 children, none of whom seems to belong to either couple in particular. They all act as one family, they tell us over dinner, and have inhabited the house for a decade. They are nice enough to share what they have: canned eggplant and summer squash, bitingly sour with garlic and vinegar, strips of dried venison from earlier in the fall, and various other kinds of smoked meat and fowl, rabbit, pheasant, squirrel. Hunter and Tack spend the evening retracing our steps and slicing patterns in the trees, so next year when we migrate, if we migrate again, we will be able to locate the mushroom house. In the morning, one of the children runs out as we are getting ready to leave. He is barefoot, despite the snow. "Here," he says, and presses a kitchen towel into my hand. Inside are hard, flat loaves of bread made, I overheard one of the women say, from acorns and not flour, and more dried meat. "Thank you," I say, but he is already running back, bounding toward the house, laughing. For a moment I am jealous. He has grown up here, fearless, happy. Perhaps he will never even know about the world on the other side of the fence, the real world. For him there will be no such thing. But there will also be no medicine for him when he is sick, and never enough food to go around, and winters so cold the mornings are like a punch to the gut. And someday, unless the resistance succeeds and takes the country back, the plains and the fires will find him. Someday the eye will turn in this direction, like a laser beam, consuming everything in its path. Someday all the wilds will be razed, and we will be left with a concrete landscape, a land of pretty houses and trim gardens and planned parks and forests, and a world that works as smoothly as a clock, neatly wound, a world of metal and gears, and people going tick 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 to their deaths. We ration carefully, and at last, after another 3 days walking, we come to the bridge that marks the final 30 miles. It is enormous and narrow, made of vast ropes of steel, all slicked with ice and blackened by weather. It looks to me like a gigantic insect, straddling the river, plunging its jointed legs into the water. Barricaded years ago, it has been so long out of use, except as a passage for traveling invalids, that the clumsily erected wooden boards at its entrance have all but rotted away. A large green sign, detached from its metal supports on one side, now hangs so that its words run vertically. I read as we pass, Tappan Zee Bridge. It sways in the wind, a brutal wind, exposed as we are, it drives right through us, bringing tears to our eyes and fills the air with ghostly moaning. Below us, the water is the color of concrete, and capped with waves. The height is dizzying. I read once that jumping into water from this height would feel just like a plunge into stone. I remember the news story of the uncured who killed herself by jumping from the roof of the labs on the day of her procedure, and the memory brings with it a feeling of guilt. But this is what Alex would have wanted for me, the scar on my neck, miraculously well healed, just like a real procedural scar, the ropey muscles, the sense of purpose. He believed in the resistance, and now I will believe in it for him. And maybe someday I will see him again. Maybe there really is a heaven after death. And maybe it's open to everyone, not just the cured. But for now, the future, like the past, means nothing. For now, there is only a homestead built of trash and scraps, at the edge of a broken city, just beyond a towering city dump, and our arrival hungry, and half-frozen, to a place of food and water, and walls that keep out the brutal winds. This, for us, is heaven.